if they don't want, when I mean they, the powers that be, our history to be talked about, for us to learn that history, it must be a reason. And that reason is because we're the only group that when we were brought over here to the United States, we weren't allowed to bring our history with us. Think about that. Because if we knew our history, we would know we didn't come over here as slaves. We came over here as doctors. We came over here as professionals that were made into slaves. So when you want to start with, all right, well, slavery, no, it was before slavery. This is what we were able to do. This is what we were able to overcome. This is what was the nation that we created. Before there was Wakanda, right? So it's a reason why they don't want us to know that information. I feel that it's important to carry on the legacy, not only because of the great things that Alonzo did and my Herndon family did over the years, but just as being, African Americans, we all have our own legacy, right? We all have our own stamp that we want to leave. And I feel that is important for my family, not because Alonzo was great, and as well as Norris carrying on the family tradition and his wife Adrian and so on, but simply because it's important because Atlanta over the years is growing. There's a lot of gentrification going on. A lot of things are changing, even for the better. But at the same time, the legacy cannot be lost of what made Atlanta what it is today. I grew up in Oakland, California, and I never visited Atlanta. I was always told, your great uncle and your family did so many great things with Atlanta Life Insurance and the Civil Rights Movement, but I never witnessed it for myself. Some of my siblings came out here for a karate tournament, and they came back and showed different pictures and brochures of the Herndon Home Museum. Was saying, hey, look, whenever you get a chance, you need to go out there and see, the great things that your family did. And it wasn't until 1996 when I ran track. So I ran track at The Ohio State University, and we had an indoor national event at the old Georgia Dome. And that was like 2 blocks away from the Herndon home. So on a day off, I said, you know what? I'm gonna make sure that now that I'm here in Atlanta that I go and visit the home because I really want to see for myself firsthand. I wanted to touch, I wanted to feel and see the history myself. And that was a major event that allowed me to be able to come and visit and be able to see the great things. And ever since that moment, I wanted to make sure that this was something that I continue to carry on. It was a lot of emotions. It was a lot of emotions because, it's one thing to immerse yourself in the history and to see it for yourself, but to be around people who knew more than you about your family. I went on a tour and the person giving the tour found out who I was and said, oh my God, we have a real life Herndon in the house. And it was like a lot of attention towards me. And they were like, well, how's it feel? And tell us about this. And it was a little overwhelming because embarrassingly, I didn't know all the things that I need to know. And that's not anything that I did wrong. It's just that, that disconnection. Similar to how segregation ended and we all kind of spread out. My family spread out from my grandfather. When he came back from the war, he moved to St. Louis. And then from St. Louis, went all the way over to California. And, as a result of that distance and time, we were not as connected as we were. So as a result, I heard about it, but I didn't see it myself. So to see it for myself, it was a proud moment. I enjoyed it. Everything was great, but it was overwhelming, like very, very overwhelming for me because I just didn't have those answers. But I made sure when I left that day, I'm going to find out those answers. And that's what I did. significance, right? We're talking about Black architects. Like that home was built in the early 1900s. African Americans built the Herndon home, everything on the Herndon home except for one part, and that was electricity, because African Americans weren't allowed to be electricians during that time. So that home was built similar to how the White House was built by our ancestors. The Herndon home was built by our ancestors, and that's a huge thing. Not only because of the testament, because the home is still around to this day. It's been over 100 years. The home is still up. You know, the museum is still open and thriving. But not only from the significance of Black architects, but also what it was able to show everyone, that there's a person that lives in our community that has a business, that is hiring in our community, that is training, providing careers and things of that nature. But during that time, you were not allowed to rent a ballroom at the Marriott, right? You weren't allowed to go to a conference center or things of that nature. But the Herndon home at that time, they allowed people to be able to have meetings there. Alonzo Herndon was a part of the Alpha Phi Alpha fraternity. They had fraternity meetings there. They had a lot of things that the average people were not allowed to be able to participate in, but because he had the Herndon Home Museum, well, it was his home at the time, actually. So he opened up his home more than anything else. It became a museum later on after Norris passed away. But during that time, the home was open. And that was a landmark that we as a people could be able to be proud of, and it's something that we can be proud of today as well. That book came to be, I remember I saw a children's book back probably in my late 20s. I was over at a friend's house, and my friend's daughter wanted to read a book, and Adam, read me this book. And it was a book about Martin Luther King. It was a children's book about Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. If you're gonna say his name, we're gonna say his name correctly. It was a book about him. It was amazing. And I was saying, you know what? Like, this is a great book about Martin Luther King. Kids are learning about that. We need something like this for Alonzo Herndon, because the average person doesn't know anything about the great things that Alonzo Herndon did. But I wanted to make sure it had a title that would grab you. The title was, the story of Alonzo Herndon, who says a slave can't be a millionaire. It's that mentality of, because a lot of kids nowadays think they have it tough. Oh, it's so hard, it's so difficult. But shoot, over 100 years ago, there were people who had a lot tougher than how you have it today. And how were they able to overcome that? By not looking at things as being an obstacle, but being an opportunity. And that was the main thing that I wanted the children, especially people that look like us, but children in general, to be able to see, yes, a person had it difficult. But what did they do? Did they use it as fuel or use it as an excuse? So that book is something that I'm very proud of. I love being able to meet parents and children. So I love that book. Some parents actually are mad in a good way. Like, that's a great book. My son makes me read that to him every night before we go to bed. Like, I'm tired of reading about that book. They say it with a smile, but the good thing is that I made sure when I wrote the children's book, I put some big words into it, because a lot of times children in the age of 3rd to 5th grade, they're not reading books on their own, they're reading it with their family. So when the parents or older siblings are reading that book to them, it's something that they can be able to explain and talk to them about, so that it's a great time for the entire family more than anything else. The Crystal Palace Barbershop, that was a barbershop right there on Peachtree Street. The world famous, right, with the crystal chandeliers, mahogany wood floors. One of the best barbershops in the world. Now, during that time, there were 2 entrances, the front entrance and back entrance. Even though he owned the barbershop, he wasn't allowed to walk through the front door of his own business. He wasn't even allowed to get a haircut in his own barbershop. And so the significance of the Crystal Palace is, during that time, if you wanted a haircut, you wanted to shave, it was like 5 cents. a dime. They had bathhouses at the bottom as well, saunas. But during that time, the people that could afford it were the elite, white patrons. That's where the judges, that was the real estate developers, that were the attorneys, the professors. And so he had over 20 chairs in there, all black barbers, but the patrons were the who's who. That's the who's who in Atlanta, and even the who's who are the people who came to visit. That was important because if you're around people who are millionaires and you're around people with knowledge and have influence, you don't need to be talking more than them. You need to be a sponge. So Alonzo knew if I'm around all these smart people, the best thing for me to do is be able to listen. Because being released from being a slave when he was 5 years old, he only had a formal education of probably 2nd or 3rd grade. So he never had that formal education because he wasn't allowed to. So by being around people who had that knowledge, he was able to kind of level up, as they say, and be able to get that knowledge. And he did great things with it. So from a cultural and economic standpoint, he did provide careers. And the great thing is, it was right down the street from Auburn Avenue. And so his vision was, I know I'm making money, I know I'm doing well, but it's something else I can do. It's something bigger and grander than I can do. And not a lot of people know this, but during the 1906 race riots, when that happened, right there on Peachtree Street, one of Alonzo's bootblacks, people with shiny shoes, he was actually killed. He was killed during that race riot. And when that happened, the African Americans retreated over to their side of town to where they live, and it was a standoff. And with that standoff, who was one of the people that they were able to contact to help resolve those race riots? That was Alonzo Herndon. Why was Alonzo Herndon? Because he was the business owner. He was the one that they went to when they got their hair cut, when they went to where they networked. See, during that time, people didn't necessarily network by cigars and golf. You go to the bathhouse, right? You go to the barbershop. You know how that is in our community, but it was like that for them as well. And Alonzo's place was the place to be. And so from a cultural significance, from an economic significance, they were able to see a person that looks like them, who has this thriving business that is employing all these people in the community and building these relationships and doing something with that knowledge, doing something with those resources. Because at the turn of the century of 1900, Alonzo owned more real estate than anybody in the state of Georgia, black or white. But he didn't just stop there. That was the influence of his wife, Adrian. She was a professor at Clark College, right, in the CAU, Clark Atlanta College, is what they call it now. She was a professor there. And who was she friends with? W.E.B. Du Bois, right? And so that's how, and we're pretty sure we'll get into this in a minute, but that's how he was able to build those relationships and become the financial backer to the NAACP, which through the Niagara movement. And that was from his wife, right? It's not about, you having somebody who's a trophy wife and just walking around with somebody just because you have some money looks good. No, a good, smart businessman wants somebody who's about something that's going to continue to push him to do great things, right? It's not about having a great partner behind you. No, you want a great partner beside you. And that's what Adrian was, and how she was able to tell him, hey, look, making money, that's fine. But what else can we do for our community with this money and resource-wise and be able to make Atlanta be what it is today? Well, you have to look at where Alonzo came from. When you grow up in situations in which there is no carpet or a floor, and you're just sleeping, there's a structure over you, but you're sleeping on the ground, and you have to work all day, and you see people like yourself struggling. When you make it, we have obligation. The biggest thing I learned from my family history and from Alonzo is, what is your obligation to the community? And his obligation was, just because I made it doesn't mean I'm gonna sit on the top of Vine City in this great mansion, look out and say, look how great I am. It's saying, well, what else can I do with my resources to make sure that people that look like me, that they have an advantage and they're able to start from ground one and have great affordable housing at their disposal so that they can be able to have something that they want to be able to continue to pass on to theirs. And that was the great thing, is leading by example. Starting the business, staying in your community, doing the best you can, giving back, providing affordable housing to people, and also building businesses at the same time. And that was the main thing that I always get from Alonzo is what can you do with the resources that you have? And what's going to be your legacy as a result? We all have a story to tell, right? We're all going to have a legacy. But what are you doing today that you can pass on to others? So everybody plays their role, okay? I like to use basketball as an analogy. Some people are great three-point shooters, okay? Some people's job is you need to go and rebound. You set some very good screens to get people open so they can be able to shine. With that being said, Alonzo knew his role was, he was the financial guy. He was a person that they had a lot of great ideas. W. Du Bois had a lot of great ideas, but who was a person that we could get to finance this? And Alonzo's, one of his favorite quotes that I even use to this day with my own son is, a penny earned is a penny saved. Alonzo stacked that money. He wasn't cheap, he was very frugal. And so he made sure his money was going in the right area. So when they came to him, he looked at it and said, well, obligation-wise, I am obligated to do what's best for my community. But what impact will this have by me being able to support it? And when he was around those people and found out about this great idea, he knew that, all right, legacy-wise, I need to have my son here. The significance, if you look at that picture from the Niagara movement, you have Norris that's sitting there, his hand is on the knee of another great leader. And because he wasn't sitting on Alonzo's lap. You know, Alonzo was standing in the back. His son was right there in the forefront. Like, hey, listen, I'm here. We're here. We're going to do this. And we're going to continue to show that we're going to make sure we're passing this on to the next generation as well. So it was a significant moment in time. I mean, and you know, for the average person who doesn't notice, that picture's up in the Smithsonian. It's in Washington, D.C. That picture will always be there. Why? Because that was the precursor to the NAACP that we see today. And he knew that was going to be a strong moment. That's why he brought his son, because he wanted to show we're going to continue to pass this on. It's not going to stop here with just us older gentlemen in the room. Nah, man, we're going to make sure we're planting these seeds and it's going to continue forward. The significance is the home that he lived in was open. Now, it wasn't open and people were just knocking on the door trying to come in, but if there were conventions and things in town, and like I stated earlier, that you couldn't go to a conference center or a luxury hotel, the Herndon home was open to those type of places, to those type of events. And so Alonzo knew when he traveled the world, he wanted people to know there's a grander, it's a lot more that's going on outside of this world that he was privy to, because he had the resources to be able to go on cruises and be able to travel. But he wanted to bring a piece of that back, right? We have sand from the Nile River in the house. We have artifacts, we have oil paintings of Gandhi from India in the house. And so he wanted to show people, listen, once we're able to overcome together these obstacles, we can be able to go out and see all these great things that the world has to offer. Atlanta's great, But we have to leave Atlanta. We have to be able to show that we're moving on up and be able to go into different places. And he brought those artifacts to show people, these are places that I've been, and these are places that you will be able to go to as well. Just have to make sure that we're doing the right thing, getting our education, putting our hard work, and continuing to working together so we can be able to achieve the goals that we have out. If you look at the Herndon home itself, it has a flat roof. So his first wife, Adrienne, she was on Broadway. She was very fair-skinned, so she passed for being white. But when they found out that she was white, she was no longer able to be able to do those different type of events. So she said, well, you know what? I'm gonna make sure when we build this house that has a flat roof so she can be able to perform on top of the house. Dancing, different type of performances that they had. But unfortunately, she passed away before the house was completed. So the vision wasn't about this is just the house that we're going to live in. The vision was, well, what can we be able to bring to the house that we can be able to show? So they had different events outside the house as well, behind the house, different conventions that they were involved in the community, but with the YMCA. They did a lot with adoption and orphans. So event-wise, that will go on in the community, which people did not have access to, be able to go to those different conference centers. Those were the type of the events that they did have at the home. So the story behind that large wooden desk on the second floor of the house is Alonzo had an office already that he worked out with Atlanta Life Insurance, but he wanted to have a desk at the house as well. So he called a local department store, which I'm not going to say the name, called a local department store, ordered this beautiful mahogany desk, and they delivered it to the house. When they came to the house, and that desk is very, 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 very heavy. A couple men brought that to the front door of the house. When he opened up and saw that he was black, he said, hold on a second. We can't sell this and deliver this to you. And he said, all right, well, that's on you then. They were too lazy to carry the desk back. They just left the desk there. So the significance is this was something that he wanted, that he could afford, and that he appreciated. But they said, well, we can't sell this to you. But they were too lazy. It was too heavy to bring it back on the truck that they left there. And so we kept the desk. And that desk is a landmark of achievement, right? Like this expensive desk that they, first of all, didn't think that African American could afford. When they got to the house, sure didn't even believe that this was a house that an African American black man lived in. And number three, on principle, said, well, we can't sell this to you, but said, well, it's too heavy for us to bring it back. So we kept that house. We kept that desk. And that was a desk that you look at the older pictures, you'll see him sitting at that desk. It was a two-sided desk, so two people can sit on it at the same time. But that's a desk that is a symbol of achievement and overcoming obstacles more than anything else. Like you think I can't afford it? Well, I can afford the desk, and we're gonna keep this to show it. So the history of Auburn Avenue is Black achievement, Black culture. It represented to us as African Americans a myriad of things. You had Atlanta Life Insurance there. You had places where you can get your dry cleaning done, right? You had places where Billie Holiday, when she came to town, would perform. It was so much restaurants. It really was rich of our culture. And that was important not only for Atlanta, for a place for people that lived in Atlanta could go to, but it was showing that, hey, if we combine our resources and we trust each other, that we can be able to show that we can be able to accomplish anything and have something to show for it. Now, unfortunately, as history has shown, whenever we have too much, quote unquote, too much, we'll say that much, that there is going to be some type of jealousy, and that there's going to be some type of events that happen that try to derail those great things that are going on. Now, we can talk about Tulsa, we can talk about the race riots that happened in Atlanta, we can talk about a lot of false claims and things going through the newspaper that tries to pull us apart. But that has happened across the United States, and that's unfortunately happened here on Auburn Avenue. But that was so significant, and it's significant going forward because we can't let that history leave. We have to be able, even though gentrification has happened, even though taxes have gone up and they try to outprice you out of your community, we still have to be able to hold on to what that history stood for and what we're able to continue to do. Because if we don't stand together and if we don't pull our resources and do those things, then we won't have anything to show for it. The future is bright, and as bright as you make it, and as bright as you want it. But a lot of times we don't pass on those stories. Because segregation ended, during that time in the 50s and 60s, the reason why Atlanta Life Insurance was doing as well as it was because African Americans didn't have a lot of choices. Right? We're seen as 3/5 of a human being. So why would we insure your life and provide you with life insurance if we don't even see you as being a full human being? Jim Crow laws itself would allow you to get killed. So what we're going to do, provide you a life insurance policy, allow Jim Crow laws allow you to get killed and then pay your family $100,000 of tax-free money? That's not going to happen. So these businesses that thrived, that did well, the banks, the life insurance companies, all those different businesses on Auburn Avenue, because we were united, because we live in a community, that money, that dollar bill was passed along. It circled around 20, 25 times before it left our community. But nowadays, since segregation and people have more options, career-wise, being able to purchase anywhere they want to, and living wise. So now that history is not there simply because we all spread out. Now, other nationalities, even though they spread out, they still will say, we're gonna make sure we go to this dry cleaners. We're gonna make sure this person sells insurance, we're gonna go to this insurance company. We're gonna bank with these type of people. But somewhere along the lines, we don't have that allegiance. In order for us to be able to continue to have an Auburn Avenue and continue to be able to have that financial strength in our community, we have to have those conversations. We have to have that type of leadership that says, this is important. This is the business reason why it's important. Because if we don't support ourselves and we don't back each other up, then how can we have a handout asking for other people to do it? So when I think of Alonzo Herndon, I think of a person that did not allow his circumstances to dictate who he was going to be. The impact is, I feel like it's important for me to be able to do the best that I can to continue to keep the Herndon name alive, to keep the Herndon name strong. To tell people about over 100 years ago, this was a person that lived by these principles. And over 100 years later, the museum, the home he lived in, is still here. Atlanta Life Insurance is still thriving. Thankfully to Magic Johnson, because Magic Johnson's company purchased Atlanta Life Insurance a year ago. It's been around for over 100 years, and we have a person who's an entrepreneur, a philanthropist in our community, in Irvin Magic Johnson, who's able to say, I want to make sure I keep this name alive. I want to make sure I keep this business alive to be able to give back. But Alonzo Herndon was more than just a businessman in that regards. He cared. He cared about his community. And that's the one lasting thing that I always keep in the back of my mind is, what can I do to keep the Herndon name alive so we can be able to continue to tell this story and be able to do something with the knowledge, right? What's use of having knowledge and having resources if we don't do anything with it? And that's what the Herndon name means to me. And that's why I wrote my children's book. And that's why I'm making sure I'm having my son, who has that last name, know his roots and continue to do the best he can so that we can continue to have the Herndon name strong even 100 years from now. So after Alonzo's first wife, Adrian, passed away, he was devastated. He had a son, Norris Herndon. He eventually did remarry. And he met a beautiful woman named Jessie Gillespie out of Chicago, and she was a hairstylist. So when Alonzo was courting her, as they said back in the day, he was telling her, hey, listen, if you move down here to Atlanta, I'll be able to buy you a great hair salon. I have the barbershop that's here. You'll have your own hair salon. It'll be grand. We'll make sure it looks exactly how you want it. And, you'll be blown away. Trust me, moving down here will be a very good thing for you. And Jessie said, if I marry you, I'm no longer working. So that a lot of times when people look at Alonzo, they see how stern he always looked and never smiled. You look at his picture, you very seldom see a picture of him smiling, because Alonzo was a businessman. He was a former slave, right? Like this, he had pain. You know what I mean? Like was there resentment at times? Yes, there was resentment for what he went through. But at the same time, he was human. And he had a sense of humor. And he was a person who was endearing at the same time. But at the same time, he wanted to make sure that if he was, dating a young lady and trying to meet her, that he was able to say, hey, listen, you come down here, I can be able to help change your life more than anything else. But Jessie did work at Atlanta Life Insurance. She did work in the nonprofit organization as well. And when she did move down, she didn't do hair, but she was involved in the family in their strides to be able to do a lot of great things in the community. So at the turn of the century, Alonzo Herndon had the Crystal Palace Barbershop. And when he would stand outside of his barbershop, he would look down on Auburn Avenue because he had dreams. He had visions of doing something grander, okay? Being a barber was important to him because honestly, when people think about a barber nowadays, what do they think about? They think about just cutting hair. But why is it red, white, and blue? When you think about being a barber, you see the barber pole, and it was red, white, and blue. A barber was more than just a person that cut hair. Instead of you going to the doctor, if you needed stitches, you went to the barber. It was a profession in which people looked up to. Do people even know what the red and the white and the blue stand for? Now, I'm not here to educate you on every single thing, but I'm sure you can Google it. That red and white and blue meant something. That's why it was outside the barbershop, because if you saw the red, white, and blue, you knew, oh, that's a place where I can go and get my teeth extracted. That's where I go if I had a wound, I can be able to get serviced. So a barbershop profession during that time, that meant something. And he was proud of being able to be a barber and providing those career opportunities. But he wanted to make sure he took his money, it did something more than just being a barber. And that's the reason why he started Atlanta Life Insurance. Because during that time with Atlanta Life Insurance, they had what you would call at that time, blacks will pool their money, okay? And by them pooling their money, if something happened because they couldn't go through the normal sources to get life insurance or burial insurance, or if someone was hurt and they couldn't work, they would go to each other where they pooled their money. But at the turn of the century, because the African Americans were able to show that they could do this themselves, they changed the law. They said, in order for you to be able to have these type of businesses, you need to have a $5,000 bond. And you had to show that bond. Who was the person in the community that they knew had the money? That was Alonzo Herndon. So that's how he was able to come and be able to take these businesses, say, what do you need? All right, well, I'll give you the $5,000, but instead of us being separated, I'm going to pool all the money together. And that's how Atlanta Life Insurance started. So Alonzo's vision the whole time was to build this business and pass it on to his son, Norris. Now, a lot of people don't know this, but Norris didn't want to take over the family business. Norris wanted to be an actor. And, that wasn't his dream. He wanted to follow after Adrian, his mother, who was in the performing arts field. But, his father was saying, hey, I didn't build this multi-million-dollar company to not pass it on and make sure that it stays in the family. So Norris pretty much had to give up his dream. And his dream wasn't going to business, but he said, I will, because I love you, Dad. I'll make sure I'll continue on running Atlanta Life Insurance. And during that time, he went to Harvard. Norris Herndon was the second African-American to graduate from Harvard Business School. He was in Ebony Magazine, #1 bachelor in the United States. Norris took Atlanta Life and made it what it was later on in his later years to be one of the top companies in the United States. He had that formal education. He had the piece that Alonzo did not have. So by passing that torch forward, Alonzo always knew education was important. That's why he instilled that in his family and instilled that in Norris and made sure Norris went to Harvard so he can take what he built and skyrocket and make it be what it was later on. So just like Alonzo was a financial backer to the Niagara movement, who did he have there with him? He had his son Norris there with him because he wanted his son to see this is something big that's happening. I want to make sure you're around this greatness so you can be able to be a sponge and absorb this knowledge. So later on in life, when Norris took over Atlanta Life Insurance, he never forgot those ties. See, a lot of people don't know that the financial backer to the civil rights movement was Atlanta Life Insurance. But during that time, they couldn't broadcast that. Why? Because they were a business. They didn't want people outside boycotting or petitioning Atlanta Life Insurance, but they were the financial backer to the civil rights movement. They were the ones that, and when they had the signs and they met and convened, they did that Atlanta Life Insurance headquarters right on Auburn Avenue. All that was done there. So in the middle of the night, when Martin Luther King was arrested, who do you think was calling to bail them out? That was Atlanta Life Insurance. That was Norris Herndon. My family made sure that they gave back. But sometimes, like I stated earlier, you need to play your position. Maybe during that time, it wasn't a Norris time to shoot the threes. We'll let Martin Luther King shoot the threes. We're just going to provide the screen. We're just going to give the rebounds. We're going to do the dirty work behind the scenes that people don't necessarily see on the stats, but everybody knows. Without that screen, without that rebound, we can't get the buckets. And that's ultimately what it was about. Teamwork that will make the dream work. And that's what Atlanta Life Insurance and Norris Herndon was able to provide. I mean, you look at the paper bag test. You look at things of that nature, right? That's not something that we're proud of in our community. But unfortunately, if you are lighter skinned, you are at times granted access into different rooms. But what are you doing with that access? Oh, the only reason why he made it was because he looked like this. All right, well, when he got into that room, how many people that of the darker skin was he able to pull in with him? And that's ultimately what it was about. Is being able to use what you have to be able to get forward in life, and who you're bringing with you along the way. And that was something that he couldn't control. You know what I mean? Like, you're giving what you're given, but what are you doing with what you're given? Are you giving as a result? And so he was fair skinned. I mean, I'm light skinned myself, and people to this day say, "Oh, are you mixed?" I say, "No, it goes back to slavery." I tell people all the time. They're like, "What?" I saw you go back to 1858, and they don't understand. Like, listen. This is just, you know what I mean? Like, my mother is brown skinned, but that Herndon traits, that Herndon is strong, okay? It's strong. Right? My son is lighter than me, type of thing. It's been going on for a long time, but I'm never gonna forget where I came from. Never. And that's why it's always important to me to have these type of conversations, to make sure that we know where we came from and where we're going, and how the movement is always going to continue to keep going forward. When I first moved to Atlanta, before I joined the board of trustees for the Norris B. Herndon Foundation, or the Alonzo F. and Norris B. Herndon Foundation, I used to give tours at the Herndon home, and I would meet a lot of people. This is before I got married, before I had kids. And they used to say, "Do you have any children?" Like, you have to have a son. You've got to pass that name on. And I used to feel a lot of pressure. When we go to Spelman or Morehouse to go speak, and I'll meet older, they're like, "Listen, you gotta, if you do anything in this lifetime, you gotta make sure you have a son so you can continue that lineage with that name." And the eerie thing is, if you look at pictures of my son, he looks like Alonzo. He looks like Norris. So yes, I do understand the importance of being able to pass that lineage on, and just knowing, just all of us, we need to know where we came from. And so I'm blessed to be able to have the name Herndon and be able to have that legacy that we can pass on to my son. But more importantly is the pressure. It shouldn't be pressure to be better than me. It shouldn't be pressure to be better than Alonzo, to be better than Norris. The only thing is, what gifts were you given? What are you passionate about? And how can you use that not only to make money and live the life that you want, but also be able to leave an impact on those that you come into a passing with, right? The people that you pass on a daily basis. Like, don't tell me you love the Lord. Show me you love the Lord, right? You can tell, I'm a Christian. No, if you have to walk around saying I'm a Christian or how great of a person you are, then something is wrong, because the way that you move, the way that you excel, the way that you take the gifts that you were given, the way that you're giving back, and the impact, the legacy you're leaving behind, that should tell the story itself. And then when people want to ask you, well, tell me about yourself, then you can be able to tell them about the family that you came from. But if you're not leading by example, then that's all for nothing. It's fake. From a proper rebuilding, we really have to, and this is just my opinion, how are we utilizing technology? See, during that time when we lived in the same community, went to the same restaurants, went to the same businesses, we were around each other. But now, segregation ending, Civil Rights Act of 1964, the whole 9 yards, and us spreading out, that sense of community isn't there because we're not necessarily rubbing elbows with each other and around and working for the same companies and doing the same things. But if we can utilize technology for the positive, right? I mean, if the videos we're posting of us fighting, of us of laughing at homelessness, but if we can be able to take that narrative and shift it back to what we want this to be about, that's how we take back that leverage. The leverage is going to come from what we're doing with our resources. And if it's important, what are we doing about it? Like, don't tell me about it, show me about it, right? Through your actions. So technology, listen, people are on their phones all the time. People are on their phones at all times, but what are they doing on their phones? Are you pacifying yourself? by just looking at something that doesn't mean anything? Or are you using the phone to get knowledge? Are you using the phone to be able to show, hey, listen, this is important. The Mercedes-Benz Stadium, Atlanta Falcons, is what? 2 blocks away. We're going to go to that stadium and do what? Watch a football game and go home. But 2 blocks up from that is the Herndon Home Museum. 3 blocks down the way is what? The Martin Luther King, his home. The Martin Luther King Center. It's so much more going on downtown than just the aquarium. But are we highlighting that? Are we making sure that that's something that's important, that we're showcasing more than just in January or during Black History Month? Are we making sure that family reunions are still being back in our communities, right? Showing the importance, because if we're just coming to town just to have a good time and going to the club or going to the Super Bowl or going to a football game and not taking the time to seeing where we came from and how it looks today and what we need to do collectively to make sure that that's still here, then we're just allowing the system to be able to take control over what we deem as important. Anything that's technology based. Technology is based because even a 4-year-old can be able to use an iPad. Like they know more about what's going on the iPhone, swiping left or right, knowing how to copy and paste and all this stuff from an iPhone nowadays more than adults do. So the one commonality that we have is everyone is using technology. But there are so many different type of jobs and careers that are being created off of technology. And unfortunately, in our school systems, in our public school systems, we don't have access to that. And if we don't have that type of access, if we're not pulling our resources to making sure that our schools, our next generation, are technology savvy and looking towards careers that they can utilize the technology, then we're going to fall very far behind. So anything technology based is very important, because that's where everything is going nowadays. Because if it wasn't important, then why do we have people trying to take it away? Why do we have a presidential election going on right now and someone saying that, well, in California, if I were reelected as president, that if they're talking about certain African-American history in the schools, then what are we going to do? We're going to pull their funding. If they don't want, when I mean they, the powers that be, our history to be talked about, for us to learn that history, it must be a reason. And that reason is because we're the only group that when we were brought over here to the United States, we weren't allowed to bring our history with us. Think about that. Because if we knew our history, we would know we didn't come over here as slaves. We came over here as doctors. We came over here as professionals that were made into slaves. So when you want to start with, all right, well, slavery, it was before slavery. This is what we were able to do. This is what we were able to overcome. This is what was the nation that we created. Before there was Wakanda, right? So it's a reason why they don't want us to know that information. So it's important for us to know our history so that we can be able to say, listen, the narrative is what we want it to be. This is why it's important. And this is why we have to continue forward. Because if you only think that the person that you are today is because of slavery, then you may be more apt to say, all right, well, it don't matter what I do then. I ain't come for nothing. I ain't gonna be nothing. But that isn't necessarily true. But if we don't know the history, if that isn't being shown as to what we can do with the history, what are the great communities we can build, and how every time we built these communities, it was torn down because they saw how when we come together with our resources, how powerful we could be, how that's a threat, then how can we be able to know that we can be able to continue to do great things? When I first moved to the South, you could just feel the difference. And I'm being honest with you, just the way that we talk to each other, right? That warmth, that love, that sense of community, it's just different. It's different. It's different when you're around people that look like you and want you to do well. That means something. When you go to schools with African-American teachers that actually care, that means something. When you have that history that's right down the street that you're learning about, and it's not something about getting you just to get a grade on a test, but you actually knowing the literature and people spending that extra time and resources, and you have historically Black colleges and universities down the street. And when they're teaching you about the importance of having your own business, about the importance of you doing better than who came before you and how you had that obligation, that means something. Because when you're building a business, I own a business myself, I know it's difficult. It's very difficult, and it's very difficult if you're doing it on your own. But if you don't have people trying to support you and back you and wanting to see you do well, it makes it a lot more difficult. So being in the South, having that sense of community that we came from, and knowing that if I do my part and I show that I care and I'm giving back, that people will want to buy into what you're selling and what you're doing, then the sky is the limit. And that's one of the important things about being in the South is. That's why I moved here. That's why I always love coming back. That sense of community, I love it. The important thing though is we just can't be comfortable with saying, oh, these people did great things 100 years ago. We're the next leaders. We're the next people that's going to continue to take that torch and bring us 100 years later. I personally cannot say that the Black elite that I know in the land are too comfortable, because I know a lot of stuff that goes on behind the scenes. And a lot of stuff that goes on behind the scenes don't have a name behind it. One of my mentors through Atlanta Life Insurance and through the Herndon Foundation, Roosevelt Giles, does a lot of great stuff in the community, but he never puts his name behind it. And I hope he doesn't mind me telling the story. And I remember he did a lot of great things for some high school graduates before they went to college. And I asked him, I said, well, what's the reason why you never put your name behind it, or that you never put your business behind it? I'm seeing all this stuff that's going on, but nobody knows that you're doing this. And he said, Adam, I'm gonna tell you the reason why. He said, because if I do it nameless and the person doesn't know where it comes from, then when they're walking down the street or they're meeting people, they're more apt to be polite. They're more apt to be more cognizant of, well, I don't know who did this, but I got to make sure I'm doing my part to continue forward to doing something with the blessing I received, because a name wasn't associated with it, because they don't know where it came from. They know it came from a loving place. They know it came from our community. But more than anything else, if I put my name behind it, I never want anybody to say, well, look at all the great things that I'm doing. It's more along the lines of, this is what I'm doing. I will continue to do it, but I don't want to walk around same way that Alonzo and Norris did. Their name wasn't behind. A lot of people didn't even know that they were financial back to the civil rights movement. It came to be later on when people said, this person did X, Y, and Z, but it's not always about, look at the great things I'm doing. It's the obligation that we have so that we can plant those seeds to continue to have the next generation continue to do those things as well. So we're talking about just from the Herndon name itself. What are we doing? So for me, I work in insurance. And one of the reasons why, so I was on the board of trustees for the Herndon Foundation that owns majority stock of Atlanta Life Insurance. And when I wrote my children's book, the story of Alonzo Herndon, who says a slave can't be a millionaire, I used to go into the school systems, the Atlanta public school systems, and talk about, hey, Alonzo did all these great things over 100 years ago, and if you take these principles, you can be great too. And children can be very honest. And they used to ask me, excuse me, Mr. Herndon, are you a millionaire? Oh, shoot, these kids are real bold. Are you chasing your dreams? And I really wasn't. Because I always had visions of owning my own business, of being able to give back to my community. And insurance was a great way to do it. But my fear of failure because of my name held me back. But by me writing that book and being in front of these children and them having honest conversations with me, I said, well, let me see if I can actually take these tools that I'm telling them will still work up 100 years later and be successful with doing it. But I didn't want to do it in Atlanta because I never wanted the reason why I was successful was because of my last name. So that's the reason why I moved from Atlanta, even though I still have ties here and I do visit Atlanta frequently. I still have family here, but that's the reason why I left, to see if I can be able to take those tools and be able to do great things with it. So I work in insurance. I have cousins who work in technology. So we're still involved in the financial world, in the technology world. It's just that from a standpoint of working for Atlanta Life Insurance, we don't have family that works for Atlanta Life Insurance, but we do have family ties to the board that owns majority stock for Atlanta Life Insurance. My Instagram is Adam E. Herndon. Also, you can type in Mr. Don't Be Average, and it pulls up on that as well, because the one thing I do not stand for is averageness. Everyone is giving gifts in some capacity. What are you doing with the gifts? And so being average it should never be on the plate for anybody. So I really want to make sure when I'm talking to kids or I'm talking to different business professionals is making sure that they know that whatever you want to be, you can be. That's what I learned from Alonzo. Whatever your vision is, then go after your vision. But if you notice from the picture from the Niagara movement, who was Alonzo around? See, iron sharpens iron. It's not cool to be the smartest one in the room. I'm gonna tell you right now. You want to be around people who are educated, who are hustling, who want you to do well, who aren't jealous of you, but are allowing you to be you at the same time. And that's ultimately what it's about. Using your gifts, not being average, and making sure you're living your life and leaving your legacy.